The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, one of those early spring days when the light is too bright for the cold air, and the world feels slightly off, as though it hasn't fully woken up yet. I found it tucked between two supermarket flyers, its pale envelope standing out not by design, but by presence, heavier than junk mail, quieter than a bill, with a handwritten address in ink that looked like it had been pressed deliberately, as if the person writing had paused often between words. My name wasn't on it. It was addressed to someone named Clara Bennett, and though the street number was correct, the apartment listed no longer existed. I knew this because I had lived in the building for 7 years and had seen the old layout during renovations. There hadn't been a 2B since they turned the second floor into open-plan lofts. I should have returned it. Marked it not at this address and left it by the building mail slot like I'd done with other mistakes before. But something about the envelope, its weight, its patience, made me hesitate. I held it for a moment longer than I should have, then, without planning to, carried it upstairs. For 2 days, it sat on my kitchen counter beside the fruit bowl, unopened, untouched, but never ignored. I moved it every time I needed space, from counter to bookshelf, from bookshelf to desk, but I never stopped glancing at it as I passed. It became a presence in the apartment. A question that hadn't yet decided whether it wanted to be answered. On the third night, I opened it. Not in a rush, not out of curiosity, but with the carefulness of someone handling something that wasn't entirely theirs. The paper inside was thick, slightly textured, folded in thirds with such precision that I could almost see the fingers that had creased it. The letter began simply. Clara, I don't know if you'll read this. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. The rest of the letter was quiet. Not confessional, not dramatic. A man unnamed writing to a woman he had clearly known well, perhaps loved, perhaps lost, perhaps both. The sentences were long, drifting, as if written without expectation. He spoke about her garden, about the way she used to sing while washing dishes, about the cracked blue tile by the front door she always meant to fix but never did. He wrote like someone remembering not facts, but atmosphere. The scent of someone's absence. And though I didn't know Clara, and had never seen the man's name, I read the letter all the way through. Then again. And again. I don't know what part moved me more, the restraint, the tenderness, or the way he wrote as if the mere act of placing words on paper was its own form of closeness. It felt like reading a memory that didn't belong to me, but somehow still reached into the quietest part of me and sat down there, comfortably. I didn't sleep well that night. The next day, I wrote back. I didn't explain who I was, not yet. I simply answered his letter, line by line, gently, honestly. I told him what the letter had made me feel, what I imagined the sound of Clara's kitchen might have been, how his words made me look at the small blue vase in my own home differently, suddenly noticing how the light hit it in the afternoons. I signed it only with my first initial. No address. No return information. But I posted it. 2 weeks later, a new envelope appeared. This time, it was addressed to me. I had not expected him to write back, not because I thought he wouldn't, but because I believed the moment had been too brief, too unreal, too delicately stitched between two people who had never truly met. Mine was a response sent into silence, not as an invitation, but as a way of honoring the tenderness of what he had written. It was the kind of exchange that, by its nature, seemed meant to remain suspended in the air, not carried forward, not prolonged, just acknowledged softly before being folded away. And yet, 2 weeks later, I found another envelope. Same paper. Same ink. My first initial written with a curious sort of care, like someone who wasn't quite sure how much space they were allowed to take up. There was no return address again. Only the letter. He thanked me. Not in a performative way, not with flattery. His words were measured, unrushed, a kind of steady warmth in the shape of language. He said he hadn't known whether anyone would find the first letter, let alone read it, let alone answer. He said the thought of someone else holding his words had terrified him at first, but then, it hadn't. Because I had answered as though the letter had always been meant for me. He didn't ask who I was. He didn't press. Instead, he began to write not about Clara anymore, or at least, not directly, but about himself. Fragments. He wrote about the smell of dust in old libraries, and how he used to sit by the windows and watch the shadows crawl slowly across the wooden tables as the day passed. He mentioned the way he always felt out of place in rooms filled with people but perfectly at ease in places built for waiting stations, museums, quiet churches, rain. He told me he didn't believe in fate, but sometimes in patterns, and how this strange correspondence now felt like a thread pulled loose from one such pattern, asking to be followed. I read his words slowly, as if speaking them aloud in my mind would make them settle deeper into me. And then I wrote again. That letter was longer. Not by design, but because I found myself pouring more into it than I meant to. I told him about the vase on my windowsill that caught the light at exactly 4:10 p.m. and filled the room with a kind of golden hush. I told him about the fact that I sometimes spoke to people I'd lost, not aloud, but in the kind of internal voice that only surfaces when the house is still. I told him I was used to quiet, but that his letter had reminded me that silence didn't have to mean loneliness. I signed it again with just my first initial. He replied. And I answered. And so it continued. One letter became 2, then 5, then more. There was no schedule. Sometimes a week passed. Sometimes longer. But every time I saw the envelope in the mailbox, my heart lifted with a quiet I hadn't known I'd missed, a stillness that had nothing to do with emptiness. Our words deepened. Slowly, carefully. He told me he used to write letters to no one when he was young, not out of loneliness, but as a way to name what he couldn't say out loud. He said he never expected answers then, he just needed to practice speaking gently to something outside himself. I told him I had always written to fill space, in notebooks, on margins, on napkins. I said I had long believed intimacy wasn't built in grand moments, but in the pauses, in the way someone chooses to stay in a conversation when there's nothing left to say. And then, one day, a letter arrived that was unlike the others. It was shorter. Just 2 paragraphs. But it carried a weight that settled over me the moment I unfolded the page. He wrote. Sometimes I find myself imagining your handwriting before I see it. I wonder if the way you write certain letters reflects the way you walk. The way you place your hand on a doorknob, the way you speak when you're alone. I don't know who you are. But I feel I've known something of you longer than I've known most people whose names I could list by memory. That was the first time I cried reading one of his letters. Not because it was sad, but because it was true. I had never known someone so clearly, so deeply, without ever knowing the sound of their voice. And that night, I wrote back differently. I told him my name. I wrote it at the end of the page, slowly, as if speaking it aloud for the first time to someone who would know what to do with it. Just my name. No address. No questions. The next letter took longer. 10 days passed. Then 13. I started to think that maybe I'd crossed a boundary he hadn't wanted to open. That maybe the spell was broken now that there was a real person on the other side of the conversation. But on the 15th day, I found the envelope waiting again, this time, with my full name written on the front. Inside, a single sentence. Would you like to meet? I sat with that question for hours, then days, not out of fear, not from doubt, but because I knew something rare had taken shape between us. Something not built on looks or gestures or time spent together in rooms, but on the unhurried unfolding of thought and feeling through ink and paper and space. And yet, I wanted to see him. Not to replace the letters, but to carry them forward into the world. So I said yes.